Welcome to another episode of Distory. My name is Kirk from walruscarp.com, and tonight, Kate the Disney Cicerone and myself are going to dive into a scary adventure. So, although we enjoy Snow White and her adventures, we're going to make them a little spooky and kooky, starting in 1983. So, with me as always is Kate the wonderful Disney Cicerone. Kate, how we doing this evening? You look very scary tonight.
I know. I'm embracing my villain era tonight with the Evil Queen. So, yeah.
Love it. It's the perfect time to bite an apple.
Well, I am doing really good. I'm very excited to talk about this ride that has traumatized generations of children and adults alike. So, very excited to dig into the history of this one. And I feel like where we should start is just talking a little bit about the Fantasyland remodel in 1983, because this was a major overhaul of all of Fantasyland. What we're looking at, Kirk is showing us something that says Scared Straight, and has a really amazing picture of Snow White looking terrified.
She's very scared, dude. In the woods, it's very creepy in there. All those trees, I'd be scared. I'm scared of how her hands look.
They are weird.
They are a little. I don't know who was in the inking department on that one, but it's a little webbed.
I remember they had a really hard time animating people back then. That's a good way of illustrating that, how much they struggled with that.
Yeah, that hand has seen better days. Look at that.
Anyway, so in 1983, well, back up a little bit. In the early 1980s, they decided Fantasyland was looking a little rough. Because by this point, it had been around since 1955. And in 1955, they used a lot of materials that were like set pieces when they designed it, right? They used, pressed fiberboard and whatnot for these things. And then they covered them with layers and layers and layers of paint. And so there's a lot of kind of famous sayings where they said, basically, Fantasyland was just kind of held together by layers of paint at that point, because it was just all kind of rotting away. So,
yeah, think of it more like old school dark rides where there wasn't a lot of 3D anything. It was almost all 2D flats on wood with paint.
Right, exactly. So they decided they needed to give it an overhaul, give it a new look. So the project was inspired by Herb Ryman's original designs and also Ken Anderson's miniature architecture of the fairy tale buildings in Storybook Land canal boats. But people will also always assume that this is how Walt wanted Fantasyland to look, but he didn't have enough money to do it. But that's not actually true. And we've mentioned this before, I think, in our Pinocchio series. So there's a quote here from Tony Baxter that said, "We had kind of made those things up about how Walt wanted the original Fantasyland to be richer. We assumed that stuff was true. We knew how much Walt really liked Storybook Land. We knew how he liked the old world look of that ride. And much of the castle courtyard area with Merlin's Magic Shop and Tinkerbell Toy Shop and so forth had that little look." So they basically just took like what was right behind the castle and just expanded it to the rest of Fantasyland. So the Imagineers began by taking each of the pieces of architecture and giving it an emotional twinge. That's what Tony Baxter said. So these new buildings were designed by Ken Anderson, who at least designed the original Fantasyland. So they had him involved in the project, of course, who was an art director on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So that's our connection back here. And he'd also been an art director for Pinocchio. So it made sense to bring him in for that ride as well. They were going to expand all the rides by about 25%. Tony Baxter said, "I made a point of saying we're going to have people constantly comparing the old Fantasyland and the new Fantasyland. So even if the ride isn't better, it will be for sure that it's 25 more feet." So he's like, we're going to make it bigger. Even if it's not better, it'll at least be longer. He says, but before we did anything else, we're going to put that many more feet in there. And boy, it was hard because the hat shop became a new scene for Toad, and Alice went in the old storage facility for the old Fan2 restaurant. Snow White, we built a new building out back, and so on and so forth. So he's like, they had to really do some reconfiguring to add that space of the track. But I think it paid off. This is what old Fantasyland looked like before the remodel. And you can see Snow White is this one right in here. And you can see this Fantasyland Theater was behind it, which then later becomes Pinocchio. So then this is what it looks like when they added 100 feet of track onto it and made it 25% larger. So this is from the original work order this is the work copy for proposed Fantasyland from 1981, in case you're wondering what we're looking at. What do you got over there, Kirk?
I'm looking at a colorized version of that pre-1983 Fantasyland, but I did find a really fun construction photo. So, like, you know how we talk about Epcot walls and how we had to deal with that for years? I think it's fun to look at how Disneyland had their walls. And this said, "Wish upon a brighter star coming true in 1983, a new Fantasyland." And then below it are kind of like coming attractions, or obviously just showing like things that have already existed. So like Mr. Toad's is in a star on the left, and then there's Peter Pan, and then there is Snow White, and then the new Pinocchio attraction that's coming. So, of course, our Snow White gets a nice little... She's having a ball, dude. Her and the dwarfs are...
She's dancing.
They're having a blast. And a big part of this, and I think this is important to note, is in the star, we actually see Snow White. And this is significant because up until this point, when you traveled through the attraction, and we talked about this in the last episode, both in Peter Pan and in Mr. Toad and in Alice and in Snow White's adventures, we were supposed to be the protagonist. So we were supposed to be the actual character. So guests would always constantly be asking, where is Snow White? Where is Mr. Toad? Like, you couldn't see these characters because you were supposed to be them. So it's nice to see. This is kind of like a subtle foreshadowing that you're actually going to see the characters that you love and enjoy from the films.
Yeah, definitely a huge, huge change to have the characters in there, which makes sense that they would have it.
As Disneyland expanded and gained popularity over the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they struggled to compete with the continuously updated and fresh facades of the other lands in the park. Though it did see several ride and attraction changes, the Renaissance fair decor overall infrastructure stayed the same. So to help fix that, and there was a lot of congestion and traffic issues and limiting space for parades or temporary attractions in the early 80s, Imagineers planned this complete overhaul of New Fantasyland. So we're going to see these Renaissance fair tents transform into a quaint Bavarian-style village, complete with stone towers and houses with stained glass windows. While the castle was unaffected by the new architectural style, the rest of Fantasyland now looked like it hopped right out of the pages of a fairy tale.
Right.
So I have an original. This is just before they do the changeover. So if we look, this still has Snow White in that circus tent style or fantasy tent.
Right. And then they brought in the bulldozers, and you can see that old mural right there that we talked about last week. But they pretty much gutted everything in Fantasyland. They basically couldn't save it because of all the cheap fiberboard and the old sets and the old paint. Everything really had to go. So they demolished the entire Snow White ride right down to its bones. There was really nothing left to save. And in the WED scope of work, they say the entire Snow White dark ride and show will be gutted. All exterior facades, interior sets, props, show action equipment, track, sprinkler systems, electrical systems, compressed air lines, ventilation blowers, and wood flooring. And also the rear wall would be demolished because they did that expansion of the track. So the day the bulldozers came in, you can kind of see some of the demolition equipment here. The day the bulldozers came in and took down most of the original Fantasyland, Tony Baxter actually looked around and said, "My God, what have we done?" Because they basically just destroyed everything that Walt had created for Fantasyland, which is crazy. Like, I don't know how I would handle that.
Well, I mean, I can imagine, right? You got to put yourself in the 80s, and you have to think pain is always, in anyone's life, pain and suffering always lead to some sort of change, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll just constantly be in that flux. And sadly, Fantasyland was struggling at that time because of massive crowds, because of lack of updating. The rest of the park was getting all of these updates. So it desperately needed it to revive. Now, I do think they should have saved some of those original artwork and murals versus just bulldozing them down and demoing them. But they had a pretty tight construction timeline.
They did. I actually have the timeline here for Snow White, which is really fun to see. This is how they organized it at WED at the time. So you can see these little bars here show you the months that they're supposed to be working on specific parts of the project. So they have facility design, construction, show, concept design, and so on and so forth, all the way until it's finally finished there with the installation and checkout, and they're done. So really interesting. Some of the things that I found in these work orders, the things that they decided they needed for this new attraction, I thought was actually quite interesting. So they definitely needed new utilities for Snow White because they took out virtually everything. So they said they needed a new electrical system, fire sprinkler system, compressed air lines, ventilation blowers, telephone lines, work and emergency lighting, fire detection link, energy management system links, and area lighting on the roof. But they also made some structural modifications to the building, probably to bring it up to fire code, because a lot of the fire, they didn't pay attention so much to the fire codes when they were first building Disneyland in 1955. They did end up putting sprinkler systems in and stuff for safety, but that was like, they had a lot of negotiation with fire marshals and whatnot in 1955 because they're like, well, what we're making is not like, people aren't living in it. It's not like a business. It's like a really unique structure.
Yeah, you gotta remember that this was the first of its kind to build a theme park. There was many carnivals and there was many standalone parks like Knott's that still existed, but this was very uniquely different.
Yeah. So the things that they added for safety, they added a 2-hour rated firewall constructed between the Snow White attraction and the Tinkerbell toy shop next door. They added floor drains, which was added for special effects and maintenance. So I was just like, I'm trying to figure out floor drains. I'm like, I don't know how that connects to special effects. Maintenance, I could see if they're washing it.
Do they have, was the fountain actually water or was it not inside that? Like,
yeah, I think it did actually have water.
So I think that would probably be the only scene I can think of that would require a drain.
Yeah, maybe that's what they're talking about. A 28-foot bay extension added to the rear of the facility, which is also for storage of the extra vehicles. Mechanical and electrical equipment housed in the second level of the added bay area. So there's a second floor of that bay area, or at least there was going to be in 1981. A new concrete flooring and new architectural facade, which we'll talk about. But it was, like they definitely updated a lot of the systems in it. They basically just replaced the whole thing. So what you should take away from this is it's all pretty much new from 1983 on.
Yeah, and think about this, right? Like, this took like a year and a half to do. Now, if Disney wanted to do this in other parks, because people always ask me when I'm live in Tomorrowland, they're like, why don't they use Stitch's Great Escape / Alien Encounter? And the biggest problem is because they're grandfathered into the 1970s fire codes. And if think about this for a second, the most popular eatery is attached to that building. So if they have to update that building, they have to update Cosmic Rays. So It's all one continuous building. If it was separate buildings, then it'd be a completely different story. But if you update one thing and they want to redo the inside, that's why I think like there are some things they can do with the interior space or just open up the previous attraction. But alas, nothing. But it makes sense.
Yeah, and Jim's in my chat is throwing in an asbestos abatement as well. So yeah, I think there's a lot in that building there. To your point, that like that's not just eatery, and it's not just that. It's like there's a whole bunch of different things that are connected there.
There's restrooms, there's Star Traders, there's the People Mover that goes above it, which I'm sure they would probably, if they had to renovate that, they would have to probably renovate other pieces of the track.
Yeah,
like, it's an endless cycle that it's almost like we could do it, but we need to have systems in place that could handle the loss of this. So the way you would do that is you would open an entirely new land, which maybe we'll hear about when you're at D23.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. I do have just a couple of notes on the ride vehicles, which we already mentioned were replaced in the 70s anyway.
Yeah, they were cool. They're so much cooler when they changed over.
Yeah. So they did say in this work order that no additional vehicles will be manufactured for Snow White. The cars resembled dwarfs' beds with, they still do, with dwarfs on the front of each one, just the names of them. Like Kirk is showing you this one that's dopey that has 2 little bunnies underneath it, which are so cute. But even though that they're modeled after the dwarfs' beds, it's interesting that they still call them mine cars, probably because of what they used to be in 1955. So they still consider them mine cars. And they do have this like really adorable detail on the inside too of the seats that you can see. They
mean, the old ones were I mean, we saw them. They were like being made in somebody's driveway. So like, I wouldn't even call this necessarily a mine car. I would just call it a plywood box that you see.
Yeah. So they did make some modifications, though, to the assemblies of them because they have a new larger type rail that they installed at this point. So the existing rail was only 10 to 12 pound type. And so they had to adjust the undercarriage essentially of these ride vehicles for the new rail that they put in. I've read a couple different places how many of these they have. One says they have 14 vehicles plus 2 spares, and another place said they had 12 plus 3 spares. So I don't really know exactly which one is true. But I do know that they're identical to the Pinocchio cars, except for what is on the surface, just the decoration on the outside. So
they have a baker's dozen or more.
They have a lot. That's all I know.
I didn't show this last week, which is another Ken Anderson concept art. But I think this like embodies how we're going to get a little bit more creepy, darker, creaturey. Because remember, everything was all just painted at this point.
Right.
And even though we have some cuddly animals, I think this bunny says it all. For those that are listening, the bunny has its mouth wide open and his eyes are quite agape. It's very scary. So,
he's terrified.
I'm terrified.
So I have just a couple of stats. The show track length is 570 linear feet, plus 42 feet of storage track where they would put the extra vehicles on. Yes. Kirk's making fun of me because it's nerdy stuff. But
you're by the way, are you reading this all from? I think you should explain where this wonderful document came from, because this is fantastic. I'll show a cover of it.
All from the work order for this ride for Fantasyland from 1981. So you have to keep in mind that they were still not finalizing their plans by this point, but I don't have one that's later than this. So this is 1981. This is what they'd said. So the ride time was 2 minutes and 22 seconds. The ride cycle time is 2 minutes and 53 seconds. The dispatch interval between cars is 14 seconds, and the hourly capacity is 1,028 people. Or guests.
And exactly the overall facility dimensions are 9,646 feet and approximately 48 animated figures and about 25 static figures.
And 40 animated props. Get excited.
There it is.
And then there's 1 turntable and 2 wheels. Where it's at.
Where it's at, yeah. In this document is really interesting because
hang on. I got to go back.
Okay.
Did you get excited when you saw the descriptive ride control equipment cabinet?
Oh,
come on, let's go.
I was excited for you.
Let's go, man. When I saw that new, it's gorgeous. We're not there yet, but I can't. This is a little teaser for those that care about the ride control equipment cabinet as much as I do.
We're weird people.
Yep.
So there is something really interesting in this, that there's not a lot of concept art that I could find from this attraction. There's a couple of things that are out there, but just not an awful lot. But I did find that in 1981, they had not added the word scary to it yet. They still designated it as Snow White's Adventures. And the plans were a little bit different than what we see in the final attraction, which we'll move through in a little bit. But I will say, I won't go through all of the scenes, but one of the pinnacle of the ride, if you will, was going to be going into the dwarf's mine, and it would have been an exciting racing scene through the dwarf's mine, like almost like trying to get away from the witch before the final scene, which isn't in the movie at all. It's almost like Indiana Jones, like minecart scene. But that
would have been cool.
It would have been cool. But it doesn't fit with the movie. So I think that's why they changed the order of things around a little bit. And it also, I think they were trying to pay respect to what came before in what we studied with Snow White and her adventures as well. But it's interesting that that was a concept that they had, that they were going to do, and then they never ended up doing it. So as we move through the ride, I'll point out some of those extra little features from that concept, because it's just really fascinating that that was going to be a thing, and then they canceled it and they changed it. So are we ready to do exterior of this new Snow White Scary Adventures?
Yes, please.
Okay. So they added this German Gothic castle exterior with the evil queen then peeking out of the window as a little something to, if you look up in the window, you can see her every once in a while. She'll open the curtains, and that's a scene directly from the film of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the details that they see on the outside?
Yeah, so we get multiple like turret structures and brick, and think like if you're not visually watching this on YouTube, think lots of big stone brickwork to build a castle. That's kind of what we're looking at here. And then there is a very large arch that says Snow White's Scary Adventure. So remember, this attraction, when we were previously looking at it and it was just her adventures, it was still really, really scary. Well, let me just tell you, they put up that beware of the witch sign to like really freak us out in the old one. This version makes that one look like Child's Play and not the one with Chucky. Now we're adding Chucky because it is creepy and scary in the best way possible. I absolutely love it. They have lots of sconces outside as well, stained glass window. There's almost like an Alpengeist woodwork too on the upper tiered windows. And then, of course, what Kate was talking about earlier with the witch looking out the window. And some of the best stuff is we're so close to see all the cool stuff. Oh my gosh, talk about it, Kate.
So just underneath the windows, we see these architectural elements that are sculpted ravens standing on top of skulls, which, I mean, they've given you so much foreshadowing about what to expect in this ride, and it's just delightful.
Oh God, it's honestly, I really mean this. I had the opportunity to ride this before it changed, and I had the opportunity to ride it a bunch when I was a kid in the Disney World version. Oh, this is what we need in a new attraction at Walt Disney World. Like, bring it back. Plus, how cool was it that the sconces had such a little minor detail, but it kind of like mirrored the Evil Queen's crown on top of the sconce.
Yeah.
Did you notice that? Like, it's like bejeweled with like red and adorned with like a golden ring, which is just such a subtle but great detail.
It's so highly detailed, all of the structural facade. And I love also the columns that are leading, that you can see from the front, have little squirrels with their tails kind of holding up the columns. And then down the column is a whole bunch of lattice work that looks like lattice work for a pie. So that is also one of the things I love the most of that. And
Gooseberry, hook it up.
There's also some owls that are on top of one of the other turrets that are just kind of holding it up for the supports, which I just like. The details on it are so incredible. Even you could tell it, like, they're like, well, if we're going to do Fantasyland and we're going to like remake Walt's Fantasyland, we're going to do it right. That's what this feels like. And I think they did a fantastic job with the outside of this queue.
Yeah, if you think back to the past, right, and we look at, I'm just going to pop it back up. If we look at the old facade being these like fantasy tents and then changing to this gorgeous Bavarian style, I mean, it is Germanic and beautiful and royal and regal and just super scary.
Yeah. So speaking of scary things, I think that's something we need to discuss is the, before we get there, we do have to talk about the Golden Storybook, because that's right before it.
Oh, don't go. You can't go into the dungeon yet, girl.
Yeah, I know. We almost skipped it. Your picture is missing the golden apple, too.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is from Daveland. I don't know if he has another one that's on.
Here,
oh, there you go.
One.
This one has one.
We have the same one. Look at us.
Oh, there we go.
So there's a book that's open with that's a golden book that has a recipe for the poison apple on it. I have a really hard time reading it. I know the first page said, with this apple, Snow White fell into a death-like sleep from an evil spell. But I couldn't read the other side on any picture that I could find. I think it said, beware. And then I can't read the rest of it because of like the reflection on the gold. It's like really hard to read. But this is the most fun part about this is that if you reached out a hand and you put a hand on this gold apple, you would hear the cackle from the witch, really, from the witch's cackle would like echo. And it didn't happen every single time. So it's like you could, if you touched it like twice in a row, it wouldn't necessarily happen every time. So it was really, really fun little detail as you enter the queue, but you would have to know that you had to touch the apple in order to hear it. And they'd had a couple of different ones that they would cycle through. But that was definitely one of my favorite features of that queue, and I'm super sad that that's gone, quite honestly. I thought it was really fun.
Yeah, she would literally, you touch the apple and you'd hear like it was great.
after this, then we head into the queue, and this is a section that they added because of all the complaints that they had gotten for parents about how this ride had terrified their children. We talked about this a lot on our previous episode about all the warning signs they had to add because people would come out and their kids were terrified. So this ride was arguably more scary, I think. There's people that say the 1955 version was more scary because of the dark spots in it and like the strings that would hit your face and whatnot when you go through it. But because of all the jump scares that are going to come up with the witch, they did put this dungeon scene in the entrance so that it would be foreshadowing for the children. And if they were scared by this, parents would be like, oh, we're not going to go on this one. This looks like a little bit too scary. And it actually did reduce complaints from guests. I have a quote from a guest that said, too bad the 83 redo lightened it. They lightened the story. How many frightened kids were prematurely traumatized by the 55 edition or by the still scary Snow White movie? So they thought that the 55 one was scarier. So.
I think they were just younger. It's a little bit simple. The only thing that's scary here is someone dropped their park map and a couple of coins.
Well, coins are like a thing here. It's always been a thing to try to toss your coins into like the cups that are down there. Mm-hmm. They have the goblets, hourglass, a skeleton scale, which is like, I don't know if that's in yours. I was only for a little bit, but check this out. It's got a little skeleton scale.
Oh, okay.
He's not always there. And some keys are down there too, which are sometimes missing from different pictures. They had a mortar and pestle. They had a skull on the table. Then up on the wall, they had a griffin. Well, actually holding the poison apple. One taste in the victim's eyes will close forever in the sleeping death is what this griffin is holding. This book down on the table. But then you want to talk about the griffin up on the wall? Because he's pretty cool too.
Yeah. So there's another griffin that's located on the wall, and he's holding like a scepter, and the scepter has a skull on the top. And in like the bottom of his griffin tail is very serpentine like, you know?
Yeah, definitely snake-like.
I immediitely went to Fantasmic. It was like, see how snake-like I can be.
Which is what this thing looks like too, right?
But that is, so it's a hand, but it's a 6-headed cobra hand. Isn't that crazy?
That is. I bet
you know what?
Has meaning. I wish I'd looked that up.
Okay, so time out. I didn't look up the meaning of it, and that is definitely something I'm going to write down for notes. But guess what? Remember this prop, kids, because this doesn't go away.
Interesting. You found it somewhere else, huh?
Oh my God, dude! Look at her. She licked her lips, dude. That means she's excited to know that it still exists. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm excited. Also, there's kind of like a little doorway that alludes to a staircase that's behind here. That's just kind of a false staircase, but you can see there's an animation projection of a shadow of the raven that's behind there, and you can hear him too in the audio. So it definitely was spooky here. There's a lot of like dungeon sounds going on with it was creepy to walk through.
Give me your best dungeon sound, Kate.
I can't because it's like drips and stuff. It was like drips of water and like. Yours is better than mine. So it was a creepy spot, and there's also the chains on the wall, which I think we should point out because we're going to talk about those later too. So there is chains that would hold a person, perhaps. That's all I'm going to say about that. We can move on.
Kate, there's a rope up here with a big knot in it, so don't be naughty just yet, all right? There is a nautical cleat, though, that's holding up the rope. By the way, if you don't understand anything that we're talking about, there's a scene that's coming up with a prince that involves chains, so that's only going to leave it at that.
Shall we move on? Unless you have anything else.
I don't have anything else for this part, no.
Okay. So remember the last time we talked, this queue used to be kind of more outdoors where people were out in the elements. And so a huge significant change that they made was that most of the queue now is undercover.
Yay!
And to do this, they had to actually expand into the courtyard. So if you think... So it was already very congested there. That's partially, though, why they moved the carousel back, is because that they needed to expand both Peter Pan and Snow White's queues out so that they could be undercover and people would not be out in the elements anymore. So we do have this really lovely undercover area that I think we all appreciate is there.
The one thing that I always thought was interesting about this queue is how you have to go through like the little turret section, you know, like it's like a little loop around circle. It's really tight in there, but and then it brings you into the queue.
Yeah, it adds a little bit of interest too, you know. Then we get to the load area, which in 1981, in the work order, they actually had planned to have it be a scenic mural, which I thought was quite interesting that we didn't get a mural. They did end up doing that, though, in Disneyland Paris. Since we're not going to do individual episodes on Paris and Tokyo, we're just going to throw a few things in here there. So this is the one what it looks like in Paris, which is a little bit similar to what it used to be in 1955 in Disneyland.
Movie poster.
But instead, do you want to talk about what we got instead there, Kirk?
Instead, we have a little dwarf cabin. And I like how it has like the bench work. And there's some tools. And it's like a thatched roof. We also get a tree and a birdhouse attached to this. And then I did notice that they have like these little apples too, which I thought was like really kind of fun. It's on the railing system, which is right up against the loading track area.
It's this beautiful iron like scroll work that they did for these apples. But this kind of detail I feel like you don't get very often anymore. All that beautiful iron work.
Because again, you know, why would you do that when you can just get something that's like off the
generic,
shelf?
right?
Generic. Also, I do want to point out over here, there is various mining equipment, shovels, picks, pickaxe, over here on the right-hand side, because I'm going to talk about them when we get to Enchanted Wish.
Oh, right. And
I hate to be a tool about it, but you know.
They did have also that the chimney for this hides one of the support columns for the building. Not many people know about that. So
I'm glad everybody does now.
Yeah, I know. Really important details.
I swear there's going to be one person who listens to this who's going to be like, do you know that chimney hides a support beam? And people will be like, oh, that's pretty cool. And you're like, yeah, I know. I agree.
I will say that this opening of this is more Tokyo Disney is very similar to this. So they're made about the same time. So this whole scene with the dwarf's cottage. Do you want to talk about the operators panel before we move on into the ride?
Yeah, you know what's funny is, of course, I don't have a picture.
I have a picture.
Panel, do you?
Okay.
So it changed from, it was like, just like, remember before, it was just metal and it was unpainted. And then it got painted to make it look kind of like woodsy rock work. And then now it's a stump.
The stump.
It's a beautiful stump, dude. I love it. It's like this big gargantuan brown stump, and I'm into it.
So that's pretty much all we have to say about that.
Well, okay, you know, I could talk more about it, but no.
Oh, gosh. All right. So let's head on into this attraction. I have a couple of different layouts for it. This one is the original one from the proposed layout from 1981, I think. No, this one doesn't have a date on it. This is actually closer to the 1983 plan. But then there's also a really great one here that was done by Kenneth Sundberg. Credit where credit is due. It's a full color version. That's kind of like 3D, which is neat. And then there's also one that Park Lore did, which I think is really helpful as well. So thanks, Park Lore, for your hard work. So scene number 1, we're going to go in. Right before we do, there is a sign that says beware, that has an owl on it that gives you safety information. And we see a little mural of the forest. And then we take a sharp right-hand turn.
I'll tell you that much.
It's true. We take a sharp right-hand turn, go in some doors, open, and then we are in the cottage scene, which has so much stuff in it, like crazy amounts of things. So, the story from the work order says that guests arrive in the dwarf's cottage where the rooms are alive with forest animals and the music of the 7 dwarfs. Grumpy can be seen playing an organ whose pipes are actually forest creatures. And the set description for this is it says set pieces depict the interior of the cottage, kitchen, fireplace with kettle, windows, staircase leading to bedroom door and living room. So that is the official WED documentation description of this scene. Now, should we talk about what's actually in this room? Because it's a lot. So most of the time you fly through this spot and you really don't see most of them. So we're going to go over a lot of the tiny little details that are in this scene, starting with the fireplace. I think is a good place to start. I feel like you had some cauldron talk to talk about, some kettle talk.
Oh my God.
Is that true?
Well, no, not here. Not here.
Not here. Okay.
You're just cooking. Just
He's cooking.
I mean, can I talk about the drawstring with the pants on it and everything?
Yeah, go for it.
Clothesline. Fun fact, the clothesline would move, and initially it didn't move a lot. It used to be really, really loose. Like it would hang down, that rope would hang down, and those little birds would wiggle the rope. It's not until later when we get to Enchanted Wish that they actually shorten the rope, and it makes that effect a lot more practical, and it looks a lot better. But initially, your pants are dancing, but they ain't dancing that much.
Less dancy pants. All right.
Yes. Worth it.
A lot of the things are just kind of scene setting with a little stool and pots and pans. And the kettle actually has fog coming out of it, like steam coming out of it, which I think is really neat. There's also a butter churn that's over on the floor. And this, to me, looks like, maybe it's just for watering things, but this looks like almost like an oil can. Like it's a really long spout.
Yeah, I think
watering
that's for
can.
maybe for hanging plants or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting.
And then clearly we haven't gotten to the point where Snow White is helping him out doing the dishes, because there is a giant wash basin overflowing with dishes, but then lots of little critters who are looking in, foreshadowing that maybe we're gonna see somebody soon.
Okay, so this is what bothers me about this is hold on, getting on my soapbox, because there's so many things in this attraction that were either never in the movie or out of show order for the movie, and nobody seemed to care that was the case. The whole point was to let them experience the movie in 3D. And yet this Snow White would never let this happen. She wouldn't be dancing and celebrating, going to bed with dishes piled up in the sink like this. What is happening here? That is not congruent with what happened in the movie. But anyway, I digress. Getting off my soapbox.
Yeah, literally soapbox, studs everywhere, bubbles or bubbling.
So you see a lot of animals. You see a deer peeking in the window. You can kind of see a mural of a sunset outside of the window because the shutters are open, the windows are open. And you also see that really unique kind of water pump is there as well with a face on it, which I always think was really interesting.
Creepy.
And then creepy. And then as you turn the corner ever so slightly, you see a bird and a teacup. And this is where you see the grumpy pie is on this little ledge that's kind of like a pass-through window to the other side of the cottage. So there's a basket full of biscuits, or a tin full of biscuits, and a little, and then there's this grumpy pie here as well, which we'll see maybe come back later for the Enchanted Wish version. Do you have anything else for this corner before we move on and pivot?
No. Grumpy pie.
And there's a basket full of laundry or something underneath there. I don't even know what that is.
It looks like pantaloons are strewn about in a wicker basket. There is a washboard underneath the one squirrel, and it looks like he's doing a little bit of doing a load real quick.
Yeah, I think he's doing laundry, and then the birds and stuff are helping hang it up because he's sitting on a chair doing some scrubbing. So maybe that's why Snow White's going to bed, is because she's just letting the animals do the dishes and the laundry.
I mean, all she has to do, la 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 la, and then they all just they work for her. They got to punch the clock. I get it.
I wish that was true. I also really love the details they put in this. If you remember, we talked about Albert Herder and all of his wooden sculptural details from the movie. I love that they've added that to the inside of this cottage as well. So if you can see on all of the beams and whatnot, you see all these little details of animals and different sculptural carved wooden accents in there. I just think it's lovely that they put all those details in
One
there.
reminds me so much of like a Gothic gargoyle mouth where, you know, most people don't know that gargoyles were gutter spouts basically off of cathedrals. And it kind of has that same vibe with like an elongated tongue and mouth opening and kind of demonic face. And they were called gargoyles because literally when the water would rush through them, it would be like, my gargoyle noise.
I don't think I ever put two and two together.
What?
Is that really why it's called that?
Yeah, dude. I mean, where do you think I make this stuff up? I'm not that brilliant. No, seriously. Gargoyles, because they're like gurgling gargoyles. Yeah, it's true.
So as we turn the corner, we're going to see this little section here that's got a little dresser and two chairs that have carved features in them. The cuckoo clock, which is from the movie, is appearing there with a little leaf pendulum below it. And early on, I found there's a little bird who has putting a sock away in a drawer, and there's kind of a sock falling out of the drawer. And later on, in later pictures, it doesn't appear. So I feel like it disappeared over time.
Yeah, I have the one that you have, but then also here's one with no bird.
Right.
Someone's bird.
So then there's also like a couple of beer steins that are sitting over on the table as well. And I love what's to the left there, which I need to go back and look this night when I'm in Disneyland this week, because they have this little shaving mirror.
Oh, dude, they have a little brush and a nice little thing of foam. Dude, I don't know about you, but did you see the Disney parks? This is just like a geeky little thing. Disney Parks for Paris posted, because they actually do like shave and a haircut there still in their barbershop. And it was showing him making lather with like an old fashioned bar of soap and a brush like that. It was really cool because like I'm used to like a shaving cream can that you just shake and it pours it out, but like old school, like whipping out
like with the
soap.
straight edge razors and stuff, right?
So, like literally you take chunks and then put in hot water and then you like froth it up. It's crazy. It's so cool. But they still do that in Paris, which is fun.
That is neat. And they definitely have a little thing of shaving cream and a brush, and sometimes they have a candle here and sometimes they don't, so it kind of depends on it. But they also have a straight edge razor that's just sitting on this tiny little shelf with a mirror, which, you know, to me is really interesting because A, it doesn't look like these dwarves shave all that much, and B, which dwarf is tall enough to get to that mirror?
I think it's maybe Dopey's the only one because he's the clean-shaven one.
If that, he'd have to stand on that chair, I think, in order to get. It's really high up on the wall, like it's like Snow White.
Dopey stands on other dwarf shoulders all the time, like when he dances. So like, I bet he's the only one that shaves, and he's standing on another dwarf's head to shave.
That makes sense. That adds up. Okay, so it's. I always thought that Dopey just couldn't grow a beard, so I don't know.
I don't know. How do I know? We'd have to see like cut marks on him or something, you know, like that he was trying to shave and didn't do it so well.
Right.
I mean, there is a straight razor up there too.
Right. So like, who is shaving at this mirror? That's what I want to know.
Snow White was. Her beard was coming in. Her beard was white as snow. And everywhere the dwarfies went, Snow White was shit to go.
Anyway, so at this point, then we would turn a corner, and this is also one of my other big pet peeves, which we'll see later when we go to Snow White's Enchanted Wish, because they changed this for Snow White's Enchanted Wish. But the original setting was Snow White going up the stairs with the cute little turtle who is featured in the movie, who like struggles to get up the stairs and he can't go fast enough, and then he falls down the stairs with his shell and all the things. So I love that he's there.
And he's also in the Ken Anderson concept art.
Yeah. So Snow White is headed up the stairs. She's saying goodnight. She's got a candle that is glowing at this point. There's also a bunny and two squirrels that are going along with her. So this is what you're supposed to see in this corner with the original staging of the track layout. This was supposed to be a featured part of this scene, which isn't now. And that is one of my pet peeves, but I digress.
Can we talk about why I love this scene?
Yeah.
Oh boy. Buckle up, kids. If you thought safety lanterns were cool, you're going to love a chamber stick.
I'm ready.
Okay, so, all right, you already have a good picture up. Perfect. I'm going to go a little bit more in detail and show you this chamber stick. This is really unique. So when you would need to light other candles in other rooms that were stationary with regular candlesticks, you would use a shorter candle that was called a chamber stick. And the chamber stick was lower profile, and you literally would carry it. And as time went on, they became more ornate. And I have a little bit of history on chamber sticks.
I love it.
You know,
that's great.
I like
all things illumination is like one of your things.
You like crates. I like lights. You know,
I like rocks and crates, and you like operators panels and illumination.
Right. So the chamber stick, which is a portable candlestick, originated in the early modern period as a practical solution for lighting homes before the advent of gas and electric lighting. The chamber stick refers to the primary use in bedrooms or chambers where it was used to light the way and provide illumination during nighttime activities. So during medieval and Renaissance periods, a portable light source had been around, and so they designed this specifically to catch and carry the wax. And they had basically, it started off really rudimentary. It was just a metal plate with a spike in it. So you would slam a candle onto it and you'd walk around with the metal plate. What? Do you like that?
Slam the candle onto it. That sounds dangerous.
It was a metal spike, dude. These things were dangerous. Think about Tommy. What do you call it? Sticking Tommies. They were literally a candle with a giant metal spike. I love it. This is like right up my alley. So then in the 16th and 17th century, the design of the chamber stick evolved with more attention given to functionality and aesthetics. Metal workers began crafting chamber sticks with broad bases to catch the wax strippings and short stems to securely handle the candle. And the handle was finally designed for easy carrying. And some of them included a snuffer so that you could extinguish the flame. But it wasn't until the 18th and 19th century, and this is where this is important because you got to remember we're in Germany, and this is like, you know, when this story was created, it was in the 18th century. So in the 18th and 19th century, during this time, chamber sticks became more elaborate and decorative, reflecting the tastes and wealth of their owners. And they were often made of materials like brass, pewter, silver, and even porcelain. The chamber stick's design remained relatively simple, with an oval base and a central candle holder and a looped handle. And here is where, do you have the picture with the face up close? If you don't, I have one.
The face of Snow White?
No, the face of the chamber stick.
Face? No. There's a face in the chamber stick? No.
Oh my God, yes. Please and thank you. Yay! New stuff that Kate doesn't know. There is a face on the chamber stick, and this one is made out of brass.
Huh.
Look at his little face.
What?
Mm-hmm. And I was able to find a very simple, this would be like early 18th century, because it does have a drip tray and a ring handle. But I did find, this was the only chamber stick I could find that had a face on it.
Wow.
Pretty neat.
That's fascinating. I had no idea how to face. I didn't have a good enough picture of that. That's so interesting. Well done, Kirk. Well done. At this point, we are going to turn the corner and see the other half of the cottage, which is the dwarves playing music. And so they're playing music, they're yodeling the silly song, just like they do from the movie. Doc is on the mandolin. Grumpy is on the organ, which the organ pipes all feature wood-carved animals that have like acorn parts shoved over their mouths to like close the holes for the organ. I'm trying to think of a way to say that isn't awful.
I don't think you did good.
You should see what's in my notes, because I looked at that. I said, I can't say that.
I would love for you to read your notes. You're going to have to send me a picture of what your notes are afterward.
I was like, nope, can't say that. Happy is on the bass, Bashful on the accordion, Sleepy on the fiddle, and Dopey is on Sneezy's shoulders and holding some flowers. And the flowers do change over time. They're not always the same.
I wonder if his face is so rosy from just shaving.
No. Oh, he definitely has his blush goes all the way under his ears.
Well, you know what? Maybe all of them shave, because think about this for just a hot
I
second,
guess
right?
they do kind of
They
shave
all
their
have
faces.
chin beards. They all have sideburns and chin beards. Like
I
chin
never
and
really
neck
thought
beard.
about it. I always assumed they just had full beards, but looking at
why
them, you're
is
right.
Their cheeks are completely, all of their cheeks would have to get shaved.
They are for sure shaving, but they're not. So they have to stand on a chair or something because that mirror's still really too high for them, or they have to do what Dopey's doing. But you can also see his flowers have changed over the years. They're different kinds of flowers, so they're not always the same.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I do love, of course, that organ that the bellows are under his rump, which is just like the movie.
It is funny. That's a great tune.
But I love the attention to detail, especially with all the different animals that are on the organ. And it's just, these are just things you just don't get to see because it goes by so quickly. But I love the attention to detail. Do you feel like this frog?
Yeah, they projected this as scene number 5, but this really becomes scene number 1. And it does talk about seeing audio animatronic figures, birds with clothesline, birds with clothesline, squirrel, chair holding pants, bird with dresser. One track is kitchen racket. One audio track is dwarf vocal. There she is. Undetermined number of music tracks. They'll use backlight and the vehicles move smoothly.
Yeah, so the whole order of it was going to be so different. So the first scene was going to be the load and unload area in the facade. The second scene was going to be the Queen's chamber and transformation. So you would enter by going into the Queen's castle. Scene 3 was going to be the dungeon. Scene 4 was the frightening forest. Scene 5 was the dwarf's cottage. Scene 6 was outside the dwarf's cottage. Scene 7 was the dwarf's mine, kind of like runaway mine train. Mine train. That was a different series. The runaway mine cart kind of concept. And then scene 8 would have been the cliff scene. So it was all different in 1981.
You know, can I just say one thing? If there's one page, though, I do like of this whole entire workbook. First of all, like when they wanted to just say what figures and props were and they had nothing else to add, they just put them in this left column and just printed multiple, and it just had just this list. So there should have been a better way to do this. But literally this entire list is just candle with holder, organ, candle with holder, and lantern.
Mm-hmm. And then it's continued because those are all that's what red tape will get you, is multiple pages of blank except for that one corner.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy.
So at this point, those of you who are listening to the podcast, Kirk has had a little bit of weather over in Florida. And so we want to make sure that we get you all of this attraction. So we are going to pause here at this point, and then continue this attraction on our next episode, which will be when I get back from D23. So there'll be a little bit of a gap here for Distory, but we promise we will bring you the rest of Snow White Scary Adventures very soon.
And you'll have something to do on Friday because I'm going to go live from Mickey's Not So Scary here in Walt Disney World, so you can come and do something during normal Distory time.
Yeah. That's it for this episode of Distory. We hope you guys enjoyed kind of starting to dig into Snow White Scary Adventures and learned a little bit about, what was it, the candle thing called? It was
a chamber stick?
A chamber stick. I didn't even. So we learned about chamber sticks. We learned a little bit about all this transformation of Fantasyland and how they made adjustments, and how Tony Baxter said, well, at least it'll be longer, even if it's not better. So I feel like we've learned a lot this episode. But we will continue the rest of Snow White Scary Adventures on our next episode. But until then, Kirk, do you have any final thoughts as we wrap up?
I'm just waiting to see your dungeon picks.
Oh, they're going to be good. It's going to be good. On that note, thank you everybody for joining us for this episode of Distory, and we will see you next time.